Thank you very much. So I'll continue talking about big data, but a very different aspect of big data. Big data of the social web to generate the patient voice, or at least that's what we call it. And is this working? It does. So we'll do a little bit of show and tell. We'll start by showing, then I'll tell you the story. So I'm going to share with you an infographic that we've created based on data, based on patient conversations across the internet. And you can learn some pretty interesting things from this little infographic. I'll go through it very, very quickly. The first thing is the dominant gender in real life also dominates the internet. So it's mostly women, a ratio of 4:1. Between patients and caregiver, it's a ratio of 80% patients doing all the talking versus 20%. By the way, interestingly enough, in some cases they're talking about the same thing, but they're using different words. While a patient would say, I'm suffering from heartburn, a caregiver would use the more medical terminology, the more appropriate medical terminology to describe that, like reflux. They would also use emotions to describe the patient. If you look at some of the top current recent trending condition, and this is a couple of weeks old, Ebola has made it to the top headlines. Not a big surprise, increase of 1,400%. I don't think any one of us heard of Ebola before that, but now it's a big thing. And that thing in the internet where people pour buckets of ice water on their heads apparently has also made some headline, up 60%. Switching dynamics of patients with therapies, depression and anxiety, number one, followed by pain and pain management, ADHD, oncology, and lastly, multiple sclerosis. Patients talk about much more than that. They talk about current affairs. So if you would pick one of the most controversial or interesting topics in the US over these past couple of years, the ACA, people talk quite a lot about that. Interestingly enough, from a geographical split, the number one state is Texas, the number two is California. Donkeys, elephants, I don't know, but that's what the data tells us. And look at what they're speaking about. They're speaking about how they view things. They're thinking about positive things like affordable and good, about negative aspects like lies and deleted, and very, very relevant issues like Medicare and Medicaid, and a very strong medical term, Tavener. Are you familiar with that medical term? She's the administrator of CMS. But patients are talking about this. It took us 350 million conversations to create the infographic that you just saw in front of you. And I swear, we didn't harass anyone. So what is this all about? The world has changed. Patients are taking center stage. If you were listening at the break here for the e-patients testimonials, which were very inspiring, I have to say, it's exactly that. Patients today are empowered. They know more. They have access to information. They understand their alternatives, and they participate in the conversation. And we'll see in a second where that conversation is taking place. But there are other things that are happening in the background. Obamacare, whether we agree with it or disagree with it, is about putting patient in the center and about measuring results, not just effort. If you look at some of the pharmaceutical manufacturers' ways of doing their business, they have less and less access to doctors and HCPs. And there's a very strong tailwind from the FDA that was mentioned here earlier. The FDA started to come up with guidelines telling participants in the industry what they can and cannot do when they start using social media and the internet. And by the way, up until now, that hasn't existed. So they're starting to open that door. What that means is that patients are online. They're not only searching for information. Yes, everybody starts their medical journey with Dr. Google, 72% to 80% of us, that's what we do, but they're also sharing. One of the rules of thumbs we like to quote is 1 to 10. For every 10 people that read, there's one that writes. And they make decisions. What does that do for us? It opens up a phenomenal opportunity. If you take big data analytics and deep analytics technology and you apply it to all these conversations, to the social web, you can actually generate what we like to call the voice of the patient, which is the aggregate wisdom and experience of all patients around all drugs, all conditions, all treatments. Now, what does that mean? I keep saying social web, social web. For some of us, when they hear social web, they're thinking about, okay, Facebook, right? Twitter. Well, yes, but it goes way, way beyond. It's tens of thousands of sites and forums and blogs and discussion boards. Yes, it's the Facebooks and the Twitters and the Reddits and the Tumblrs and all these cool sites, the most popular social destinations, but it goes all the way to the long tail, that community of 37 MS patients from North Dakota that is very small, but they're talking about meaningful experiences. And they're talking about it every single day. So it's hundreds of millions of people generating millions of pieces of content. We call it UGC or PGC, patient-generated content, across all these different outlets. So this is social media. And from a technology perspective, you really, really need to do it with technology. At Trito, our secret sauce is a combination of NLP, natural language processing algorithms. Really, it's about understanding the language that people use. We combine that with medical ontologies to bring in the health context, which is critical. We'll get to that a little bit further down this presentation, hopefully. And we top that off with what we call patient language dictionaries, which is how we cope with the inherent unstructured nature of the data. Think about the slang. Think about the synonyms, the acronyms, the poor grammar, the poor language, the typos. And at the end of the day, it needs to be brought to you in an accessible, actionable way. But if you can do that, if you can apply technology at that scale and use it on the social web, you can start connecting the dots. And this is where it starts to get interesting. It's no more just an anecdotal conversation here or an anecdotal post over there. When you look at the condition, at the disease state, at the drug, at the therapy, at the treatment, and you can start seeing, okay, I'm seeing a pattern. Something's going on, and we may know about it, we may know about it. Doing this with technology enables us to do this in real time on a massive scale and still be able to go in very, very deep. How deep? In fact, and there are a lot of doctors here today, this is a completely new set of data. It's a completely new set of health data that didn't exist before. Using this kind of technology, you can actually understand patient conversations describing their journeys from being diagnosed or early symptoms and getting diagnosed and getting treatment, getting better, getting worse, getting hospitalized, going home. You can understand their switching behavior, their financial considerations. You can understand the efficacy of the treatments that they're getting, the safety profile of their drugs and how they're taking it. You can understand the interaction with their physicians, but from the lens of the patient, not from kind of the cold reports in the system. And you can understand the softer, yet as critical, in my view, part of their concerns and their gaps and their needs and their questions and their fears, which we heard about earlier today. And this is extremely powerful and is critical for literally every stakeholder in the game, starting with patients, because it's about the patients, going through the manufacturers, the insurance companies, the providers, and everyone else that is participating in this game. The benefits are really, really, really extensive. We don't have time to go through everything today, but just a selected bunch. It starts with seeing things very, very early. When you start connecting the dots, you can see signals very quickly. If it's safety, then you're actually benefiting quite a lot in getting lead time on a problem. Performance of treatment and therapies and drugs is another very, very big benefit. Identifying health trends and directions, for example, that Obama thing, and actually it becomes even more interesting, and best practices of how people are consuming these therapies. And you'll be amazed, and most of the people in this room are in this profession, you'll be amazed at what's going on out there in the real world. May have some time to give you some examples. However, it's pretty challenging. It's pretty challenging. It took us 6 years to build technology and infrastructure in order to do this. And we're not done by any means. We keep doing it every single day. We have a bunch of engineers. Keep trying to understand how to do this. It starts where do you find the content? We're focused on personal experiences. We care about personal experiences of patients and caregivers. We don't care about commercial stuff. Where do you find that? And when you find that, how do you identify that it's a personal experience? And when you identify that it's a personal experience, how can you really start and understand what that experience is all about? It's unstructured. No one's really put it into a nice table. and it's in human language. It's not in, a medical paper language. And lastly, doing it on a big scale and 24/7. So we're about the voice of the people, so I'm turning this session to be a session by the people, the voice of the people. I have 5 minutes less, more or less, and we can use them to talk about examples or to dive deep into the technology challenges. So give me a quick raise of hand. Examples? Examples. Okay. Technology challenges? I think examples win. So a few examples, and I'll adjust with the time that I have left. I'll actually talk about best practices. I'll give you a couple of very nice examples. Very, I think, disruptive examples. You may be familiar with the drug by the name of Erbitux. It's a therapy for cancer. More specifically, one of its main indications is head and neck cancer. And one of the known side effects of that treatment is a very severe rash by patients. Going through the patient voice about that specific therapy, we found out something very, very interesting. Patients tell us, they don't tell us, they tell one another. But patients tell us that if you start on an antibiotic cycle 2 weeks before going into your first radiation treatment, you actually can reduce the rash significantly, in some cases even avoid it. If you start taking antibiotics 2 weeks before, no rash, or very, very little rash. Most physicians were not or are not aware of that. By the way, the drug manufacturer was not aware of that as well. It changes the whole cycle. You need a dermatologist involved. It's a completely different way of looking at that therapy. Another example, Mucinex. We're going into the winter soon, so you walk into your Walgreens or CVS, and Mucinex is right there on the shelf, and we were looking at Mucinex, and we saw something very interesting. Alongside Mucinex, there were a lot of conversations about clomide and a lot of conversations about pregnancy. Any ideas why? Why would people talk about pregnancy and clomide alongside an anticongestant? A little bit of digging, and we found. Apparently, Mucinex not only reduces the mucus here, but it also have an impact on the female parts that actually helps women get pregnant. And that was common wisdom, or is common wisdom, out there. Again, the practitioners that we talked to, the manufacturer that we spoke with, they were not aware of that. They were not aware of that. So, 2 examples of how patients are using a drug slightly differently and coming up with some great results and and ways to take advantage of these drugs. We have early safety signals there, so I have time for another one, and I'll do that. Tecfidera, Biogen's MS drug that came out in April of last year, we were keeping track of that drug from the days it was called BG12, when it was still in clinical trials, because guess what? Folks get on clinical trials, they sign those NDAs where they're not supposed to talk about the clinical trials, they go home, they start talking about the clinical trials. And when they talk about the clinical trials, we see it, because it's all out there. And when they started talking about this specific drug, which is an oral drug for multiple sclerosis, very quickly you could see conversations about GI issues. Now, these are patients. They're not saying, I'm suffering from GI issues. They're saying, I have stomach pain. I have stomach issues. My belly hurts. These kinds of words. But again, if you can start connecting the dots, you can very clearly see that there was a GI problem. And as the drug launched in April of last year, you could see the amount of conversations about that going up very, very, very quickly. And neurologists starting to talk about this, and it was a clear issue which was not in the leaflet. It was not on the PI. By the way, a few months after that, Biogen came out and added that to the PI, and it's a great drug. It's doing very, very well. So I'm almost out of time. I'll end up with another example, which is a question for you guys. Do you know who the dragon slayers are? Who are the dragon slayers? Any idea? No? So apparently, for Hep C patients, Hep C is the yellow dragon. That's how they call it. And they consider themselves to be slayers of the dragon. Now, don't be embarrassed that you didn't know this. Most people don't, including people who have been in the Hep C business for 10 and 20 years. They did not know that. They didn't understand how their patients were seeing this. So at the end of the day, for us, it's really about generating the patient voice and bringing it into every single patient-related decision. Because we can. Technology enables us to do this. And the result, better outcomes. Thank you.
I'd like to open it up for some questions.
Two short questions. Some of those conversations, I mean, many of the most in-depth conversations come from communities that are hidden behind walls, privacy walls. How do you get to them? And
we don't.
Second question is, some of the examples you provided are deeply troublesome to the pharmaceutical industry because you're basically forcing them to change labeling. How do they handle it?
Good questions. The first very short answer is we don't. When we come into a walled garden, if there's a door and a lock, we don't go in. By the way, most places do not have a door and a lock, and they actually allow you to go in and bring those conversations. And those that don't, we don't. But to give you a sense of scale, to date we have collected about 2 billion conversations. We pull in about 1 million new conversations every single day. So the weight of any one single source is almost negligible in that sense. We see quite a lot of data. With regards to the manufacturers, you're right. Some of the stuff that we surface, they don't really like to see, but it is what it is. If there's a problem out there, they need to know about it. At the end of the day, when we wake up in the morning, the sign on the door says, "We serve the patients." We take those insights and we share it free of charge, by the way, free of advertising also, back with patients on treater.com. People go in, we have millions of people coming in every month, they look at this, it helps them make their own decisions by seeing what are 27,000 other people doing in the same condition. So, yes, not everyone likes it, but as it was said here before, it's a change, it's innovation, and for me, the road forward is very, very clear.
Thank you. My name is Mark. I'm a physician. Thank you for your work. It's very important. A question I had regarding your algorithms was, is there any kind of weighing scale in terms of where the source is coming from, a blog versus an official cancer site or something like that? One of the things that I'm just curious about is if this big data set is used as a source of truth, then how does something like the social web perception that vaccines cause autism, how does that get disseminated, and how does the patient interact with that?
It's a fair question. So the first answer is absolutely yes. There's a very, very long and sophisticated valuation, scoring, and assessment process. When we look at content, we clear out the spam, we clear out the duplicities. We start looking at, we start analyzing it in order to understand what it's all about. And it gets scored based on multiple parameters. So it's a pretty sophisticated mechanism in order to really surface the important things, the one that have higher credibility. The ability to, at the end of the day, what we do is no substitute for you. Okay, this is not instead of a medical authority. But what it does is a few things. First of all, it sees things first. You know why? Because the internet knows first. Because patients are 24/7 online and they're talking about their experiences. So it sees things first, it surfaces them up, either as a signal or as an additional flavor, additional aspect. In some cases, it's a very strategic, very critical aspect. In some, it's really more adding more color. And I think at the end of the day, there's no silver bullet. I mean, there's no one answer. It's the HCPs, it's the medical authority doing what they do so well, coupled with, okay, here's your medical literature, and here's what 100,000 other people have experienced. And combined, I think you get a pretty good treatment set up for your patients.
Hi, I don't believe you said a word about your business model, or if you did, could you just give another couple of sentences about it?
Sure, I'm not allowed to. It's a non-commercial.
Not from HIPAA.
Yeah. So we do two things. One is we share those insights free of charge, as I said, free of advertising, back with patients. You can go into treater.com and use it as much as you like. Secondly, we have a more high-end, sophisticated platform where we work with pharmaceutical manufacturers, with providers, in order to help them tap into the minds of those millions of patients across multiple areas of their business, all the way from clinical development strategy through market opportunity assessment, identifying emotional triggers, white spaces, what kind of products they can bring into market, where are the gaps, how can they help, going through kind of monitoring brands and products that are out there and seeing the problems, helping them solve them. I'm out of time. I would have given you a couple of nice stories around that. All the way into safety and pharmacovigilance, which is still very, very early days. Unfortunately, in my view, 3-4 years from now, I have no doubt that product safety and pharmacovigilance is going to be mostly reliant on the internet. That's not the case today. In fact, it's almost the opposite. The FDA is not there yet, which is a shame. But some manufacturers understand that, and they are looking to be informed about what's going on, and we're helping them with that. All right. Thank you very much.